Happy Wednesday, everyone. We are to the chapter of the book of Daniel that is the toughest chapter in the entire book. It's a tough chapter not because there are too many crazy things going on, but because there is so much historical background that matches up with the vision that it can be mind-boggling. But we'll get to that in a minute. Remember that chapter 11 is a continuation, really, of the vision of chapter 10 that you looked at last week. And so this vision, at least this part of the vision, is entitled The Prophetic History Lesson. The Lord narrows in on one section of the Greek Empire, and now he is going to detail ruler after ruler after ruler after ruler, and what is happening in between the lines. All of these predictions of specific events in the future that Daniel certainly hasn't gone through yet, and we have the privilege of looking back on and seeing historically how everything matches up. So let's get into it. Chapter 11 of the book of Daniel. Here's a review and introduction. God had already revealed to Daniel in visions and in dreams some of these kingdoms that would rule over the people of Israel. You had the dream to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. You had the vision to Daniel chapter 7 about the four beasts. Then in chapter 8, remember the two animals, the ram and the goat and the horns, and there's a fight. Those are representing kingdoms. Well, now you have this very specified look at one of the animals of Daniel chapter 8, and that is the goat. We're going to get into some detail here, and you might think, why would we even be going through all that detail? Well, we'll get to the main point in a second. The entire book of Daniel really requires you to have some sort of historical background of what's happening. But Daniel chapter 11 relies heavily on your historical knowledge. I'm going to help you out with that in a little bit, though. Here's a very brief background. Remember, the kingdom of Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire, was in full throttle during his reign, but then he dies. He has no successors to pass it down to in his family line, and so now it's split up into four different sections throughout the known world. Well, two of these sections, two of these generals are important to us in Daniel chapter 11, because two of them are important to the actual nation land of Israel at the time. Ptolemy ruled in the area of Egypt to the south of Israel. Seleucid ruled to the north of Israel in the region of Syria and beyond. And so because there was a dynasty just to the north and there's a dynasty just to the south, guess what happens to Israel? It becomes a battleground for centuries and centuries. This is what you need to watch for as you go through Daniel chapter 11. It keeps going back and forth between the king of the north and the king of the south, and the king of the north and the king of the south. It doesn't give names. Well, it's not referring to one specific person every time. It's talking about the succession of kings in the north and then the succession of kings in the south. And it can get kind of confusing. But just think of it as the king in the northern area at that time and the king in the southern area at that time, and some of the things that they were doing. Remember that the king of the north refers to the Seleucid dynasty during the Greek Empire, the Greek dynasty, and then the southern king refers to those of the Ptolemaic dynasty of the Greek Empire. They're just going back and forth and back and forth. And as I mentioned before, luckily, fortunately, we have the opportunity to look back at history and see how this prediction matches up exactly in line with what happened. The land of Israel not only becomes a battleground, but the nation of Israel is caught up in a tug of war as well. The Ptolemies and the Seleucids continually are fighting to have control over this middle ground, over this very lush and productive land of the Fertile Crescent. And the people of Israel are just going back and forth between these two rulers who are calling the shots, and it's going to get really ugly towards the end. You are going to need some historical cliff notes to help you through this. And to do that, this is the first thing that I would suggest. This is the People's Bible Commentary series, specifically, of course, on the book of Daniel. We have all of these in our church library. If you're close enough to our church in Montrose, come over and grab this. There are actually 3 copies of this in our church library, so you can go over there and get one for yourself. If you are not close enough and you want to order one for yourself, that's fine. Go to Northwestern Publishing House, that's the NPH there, Northwestern Publishing House, and order one. You might even be able to find it on Amazon. I probably should have checked, but I didn't. You can check for yourself. This is the #1 resource where it will give you the exact historical matchups with what's going on in Daniel chapter 11. The other option that I'm going to give you is a decent study Bible. A study Bible is a Bible that then gives you footnotes, and not just footnotes, but nice historical explanations at the bottom of the page. This is my study Bible that I use. I don't use it a lot. I use another translation I just read from. But if I need historical footnotes, then I crack this open. Really, any study Bible is probably going to give you some sort of decent reference of these historical characters. So I wouldn't worry too much at this point about which one that you have. Just be careful, because any study Bible means it's a commentary. And commentaries are people's opinions. And so you have to take some things with a grain of salt. At this point, with Daniel chapter 11, you do need some historical background. This is what this is all about. I'm also giving you a website here. I try to look through different websites to see which ones gave you an accurate representation of what was happening. The one on your screen, it gives you a nice list, side-by-side columns of what is happening. Now, full disclosure, I am not promoting everything you might find on angelfire.com. In fact, I did not go through it at all, other than this one page that I am showing you right here. The reason I want you to be careful about what you find online is because anyone can say anything, of course. And when it comes to the book of Daniel, people have all these kinds of crazy theories about what different prophecies match up with and what these numbers mean and what's happening now. Don't even bother. It's just going to confuse you. It's going to mess with your head. You don't need any of that. You just need the straightforward Word of God, and that's fine. This is the Word of God matched up with the actual historical incidents that they were referring to. That's really what you need. So what is the main point in this entire chapter? Well, every single detail of future is known by, planned for, and directed by the Lord for the good of his people. That is very evident in this chapter. It's so specific. It's so detailed that this main point cannot escape notice. And that, of course, is going to lead to what does this have to do with you? Although you don't know your future, God does. And although you can't control the future, God will. And he will for your spiritual well-being, just like he did for Daniel and for the people of God in Old Testament times. You don't have to worry about it. The Lord has everything in his hands. It's now time to tackle the toughest chapter in the book of Daniel. Do not get too bogged down in the details. Do not get frustrated that you're kind of confused about what's happening. Like I said before, either use the People's Bible Commentary, use a good study Bible that's going to give you some of the background, or use that web page that I gave you a couple slides ago. Those are necessary to help you get through some of the details and some of the characters that the Lord talks about in this chapter. Hope you have a fun read through Daniel chapter 11. gearing up for Daniel chapter 12 next week, which will be our last chapter, and it's going to be one of the best chapters in all of Daniel. Have a good day. I'll see you again soon.